Hello, my name is Joelle Andrews, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Progress. Welcome to our webinar, 5 Things You Need to Know to Get to OpenEdge 12. Now let's get started by introducing today's speakers. Today we are joined by the Chris's. We have Chris Longo and Chris Skeldon. Chris Longo is the Service Delivery Manager for OpenEdge applications in North America. Chris has a long history with the OpenEdge platform. He has spent many years delivering consulting and architectural services related to the OpenEdge platform, as well as spending many years delivering OpenEdge trainings and speaking at various conferences. Today, Chris and his team provide services related to PaaS enablement, security, CI/CD, migrations, and UX plus modernization. Chris Skeldon started at Progress in technical support before switching to professional services, where he helps customers migrate to OpenEdge 12 and specifically with paths for OpenEdge coding, authentication, and deployment. Apart from a few years working with Sonic, he is focused on OpenEdge development and build automation, particularly around Classic App Server, web speed, and now paths for OpenEdge. Now I'm going to turn it over to Chris Longo to start the presentation. Chris?
Thanks, Joelle. Today we want to talk a little bit about upgrading your OpenEdge application to version 12, and we want to talk about some of the things that you might want to consider and plan for with regards to upgrading your OpenEdge application. We're going to start by looking at some of the more common migration flows. We're going to take a look at what you might want to consider prior to upgrading an application. We also want to talk a little bit about a new feature in the OpenEdge platform called the External Security Administration Manager. And then finally, how can we help you guys execute an upgrade? So I'm going to turn things over to my partner, Chris Skelton, and he's going to talk a little bit about common migration flows. Chris?
Thank you, Chris. And I'd like to talk about some common migration flows, starting with updating an existing system. In this scenario, we have an OpenEdge on a server, and what we want to do is upgrade on that same server. So typically what we will do in this scenario is we will install next to it the next version of OpenEdge, in this case OpenEdge 12. And then we're going to go through a number of steps. The first thing we're going to do is take a copy of our database and move that to 12, and then we're going to convert it. In this scenario, we might do the simplest of conversions, conv 11 and 12. And then when we've got to convert a database, we're going to recompile our code against that database, and then we're going to test it. And testing here should include both functional and non-functional testing. So by functional, does the application do what you want? And by non-functional, we mean things like performance. Does it perform as you expect? If you're moving to PaaS-OE, which you probably will be, then PaaS-OE has gained a reputation for exposing existing memory leaks in applications. So some sort of soak testing where you just run it for long periods of time and see what happens to your memory is a very useful thing to do. When you're happy with everything, then you're going to remigrate your database and go live. A slightly more complex problem is when you're moving operating systems. And that is always going to start with you to dump the data on your existing platform and then move those data files and your source code to your target platform, where you'll create the new database, load the data in, recompile the application, and then test as before, both functional and non-functional testing. Assuming everything's good, then before go live, you'll have to remigrate your data so you have the latest copy of it when you start on the Monday morning. There's a number of ways you can move your data. One is a simple data dictionary load, which is probably the slowest. And you dump it on one machine, copy it to the other. Binary dump is significantly faster, especially as you can do things in parallel. But if you have a larger volume of data, even that may not be fast enough. So one of the things our MDBA group provide is a service where they bring Pro 2, and they will pre-migrate as much of your data as possible before go live. And then at the go live weekend, or whatever it's going to be, they can just migrate the last bit and gives you the fastest possible switch over with the least amount of downtime. And over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. I'd like to talk a little bit now about some of the things you might want to consider as part of upgrading your OpenEdge application, particularly in consideration of your application. So we're going to talk a little bit about the OpenEdge platform itself. We're going to talk a little bit about cloud migration. We'll talk about the app server because there is a new app server in version 12, so there should be some planning around that. And then finally, we'll discuss 32-bit considerations. So as you may or may not be aware, OpenEdge 11.7 is now in retirement. OpenEdge 12.2, which is the old long-term release, is available until 2028. And then the latest long-term release is OpenEdge 12.8. In terms of platform considerations, the Solaris platform will be retiring in 2028, and OpenEdge is available up to 12.5 on Solaris. 12.2 would be the last long-term supported release. HPUX is already in retirement, and AIX will be available until 2028, with the last long-term release being 12.2. So if you haven't already started to make plans, you should probably think about making plans to do a platform migration in conjunction with your upgrade. We'll talk more about the implications of that here on the next couple of slides. So in terms of a platform dependency, so if you are moving away from a particular platform, like going from AIX to Linux, which is a common pattern, some of the things that you might want to think about or look at are your continuous delivery, automation processes and scripts. There may be dependencies on the old server platform that have to be migrated or adjusted for the target server platform, database scripts and monitoring, authentication. If your authentication is dependent on AIX and you're going to Linux or some different flavors of Linux, that has to be looked at and possibly changed. And then also any of your OS commands, input output through device integrations have to be looked at to make sure that they're fully functional on the target server. If you're thinking about going to the cloud, Azure or AWS, I know it may seem like it's just somebody else's computer, but there are things that you probably should consider, specifically around networking and what aspects of your application or other applications that you have to integrate with are on-prem versus in the cloud. So how do you support the connectivity there? That's where the networking comes in. Security. So, today, what is your authentication authority? Is it rooted in OpenEdge? Is it a third-party authentication? And if you go to the cloud, is the third-party authentication supported? How do you migrate that kind of thing into the cloud? So that has to be looked at. And then, of course, provisioning hardware like disks and CPUs and the like have to be considered and looked at for the database and the application. And then finally, depending on the user experience, if the user experience is being delivered via terminal emulation or are they GUI desktop, how is that going to be delivered in the future when you get to the cloud? There are options, but again, you've got to plan for it, right? Like a web speed application is probably the easiest thing to migrate to the cloud because the user experience is delivered via a web browser, which is ubiquitous. When you're moving to version 12, the classic app server that we all know and love is retired. And so when you get to version 12, the app server platform is the Progress app server platform, which is a Tomcat-based application server. And it has completely new configuration files. There are new ways to monitor and tune paths. And so you have to do some planning around how you might architect paths to support your particular use cases for app server. And there are obviously many different kind of use cases for app server. This is something we help customers with all of the time. From a web speed perspective, you can migrate web speed applications from Classic to PAS. They are fully supported. Embedded speed script is fully supported. The only caveat to that is if you're using an old paradigm called mapped web objects, they have to be more thoroughly looked at, and oftentimes they may require some application enhancements to make sure they're fully functional. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention that that paradigm of map web objects is something that is being sunset, and you should really consider possibly re-architecting and getting off of map web objects as you do your planning to go to 12 and to PAS. I'd like to talk a little bit about some considerations with regard to the PAS platform itself. The PAS platform is a completely different platform from the classic app server. It is rooted in Tomcat, and it is a specially formulated Tomcat instance to support OpenEdge applications. And one of the big differences between PAS and the classic app server is that PAS is a multi-threaded environment. In classic app server, you had a single agent that was tied to a single process. With the PAS app server, you have a multi-session agent that supports multiple OpenEdge sessions. From an application perspective and application use cases, when it comes to long running jobs, batch processing, if you're doing batch processing in the classic app server, PAS needs to be tuned for that. PAS is at its heart and soul, it is a web server, so there are some timeouts, and you can tune, again, you can tune for long running batch jobs. Stateful and state reset connections also require some special tuning in PAS, as well as if you make heavy use of OS commands that are particularly long running, again, special tuning considerations around that. And for more information, reach out to services. We can absolutely help with configuration and tuning around these topics. In terms of monitoring, PAS has many new features. The OpenEdge Manager provides a graphical means of monitoring and maintaining PAS. There's also a set of APIs that can be leveraged for accessing different metrics and data that's occurring on a PAS instance. JMX is another option for querying the PAS agents for performance tuning data. And that leads me to talking about OpenTelemetry, which is a relatively new feature. So OpenTelemetry is a vendor-neutral open source framework for gathering statistics or telemetry data that's being generated by the OpenEdge database or a PAS instance itself. And it was introduced in the OpenEdge Command Center, but the OpenEdge Command Center is not a prerequisite for using OTel. You can integrate OTel with just a regular PAS instance. You just have to leverage the APIs that I mentioned before. So it gives you a very nice user experience in terms of dashboard and monitoring PAS, but it is a third-party integration. When you're going to version 12, generally speaking, version 12 is a 64-bit platform. And as such, if you have 32-bit dependencies, you have to plan for that. You have to plan for eliminating those 32-bit dependencies. Now, typically, OpenEdge applications have 32-bit dependencies in the GUI client, and there's a plan for that. So OpenEdge 12 does support a 32-bit Windows client. So if you have 32-bit OCXs or controls that you're using, you can continue to use those for the GUI client. But everything else, the PAS platform, the database, everything else is basically 64-bit. So if you had some kind of back-end 32-bit dependency, that has to be looked at. An alternate solution has to be found that is not 32-bit dependent. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about the External Security Administration, ESAM. ESAM is new in version 12, I believe it's 12.6. And ESAM is provided to guarantee or to make sure that your OpenEdge installation the platform bits are secure and are tamper-proof. So what that means is, ESAM secures an OpenEdge platform, and it prevents hackers from basically redirecting OpenEdge activities to something outside the installed OpenEdge platform directory. It can actually manage and secure multiple OpenEdge platform instances on a particular server or virtual environment. ESAM is inherently part of the OpenEdge installation automation. So when you install OpenEdge, whether it's on Linux or Windows or whatever, it automatically is going to either check for a pre-existing ESAM install, or it's going to install ESAM. ESAM is not supported for 32-bit Windows. It's 64-bit only. So ESAM, as I mentioned before, provides a secure location for all of your OpenEdge files and executables. ESAM itself is installed in an alternate secure location. So for example, on Linux, it's in etc. In Windows, it's in system32. And then you'll see a directory called openedge.d. Openedge.d is basically ESAM. And that folder is locked down, and really only administrators would have access to that area. ESAM provides audit logs, and if you are an administrator and you need to track the visibility of potential threats, there are logs that can be monitored, and failures can be recorded and dealt with. As I mentioned before, ESAM is version independent, meaning it can manage multiple installations of OpenEdge as long as those versions of OpenEdge are 12.6 and later. The administration of ESAM is separate from the authorization for OpenEdge management, so you have to have elevated privileges to manipulate or access the ESAM directory. You should also make sure that ESAM is part of any kind of backup strategy. You want to be backing up the openedge.d directory as well. So what do you need to know? If I have to boil it down, what do you need to know? To not use the ESAM set DLC utility that's for internal use only. You cannot copy an OpenEdge directory any longer. So you cannot copy the OpenEdge binaries to other locations. The location that OpenEdge is installed into is recorded and locked down by ESAM. ESAM, I should mention, needs to be installed on the same server as your OpenEdge installation. In other words, it can't be on a network drive. And don't change the ownership on the ESAM services directory. Finally, ESAM should be basically secured in all of your environments. The access to that directory should be secured. You don't want to tamper with the access directory settings on the ESAM directories. And your OpenEdge installation scripts should not be moving or tampering with ESAM or the OpenEdge directories themselves directly. That should be done as part of the OpenEdge install. So I'm going to turn things over to Chris, and we're going to talk a little bit about how services might be able to help with your version 12 upgrade.
Thanks, Chris. So how can we help? Well, we provide a range of services covering the whole gamut of our products. As we mentioned earlier, the MDBA team can help with all sorts of migrations and upgrades, and for very large upgrades, they all can bring the Pro 2 license to preload as much of the data as possible to try and give you a smooth go live. And as a consulting group that I sit in, then we're used to dealing with all sorts of upgrades across the rest of the product suite. So as part of the data migration plan, it's often an opportunity for people to reevaluate how they do backups, what their overall business continuity plan is, structure of the database, and the database group offers something called a database health check. And based on that, they might advise that you change the physical structure of your database, where you're perhaps change the records per block size, and so on and so forth. And that might be something particularly you want to take advantage of if you're dumping and loading your database to move across platforms. In front of that, what the database group call the front end, which is everything that connects to a database. A lot of our work at the moment is around migrating CAS to PaaS, DevOps for both development and deployment automation, and modernization. So quite a lot of organizations have a mature, sophisticated OpenEdge application and know they want to move it forward, but aren't quite sure what their options are. And as a consulting group, we provide something called a modernization assessment, which looks at where you are now, where you'd like to go, what you want to achieve, and offers you potential routes forward. As Chris alluded to earlier, PaaSOE is a very different beast to classic app server. And sometimes people struggle to get to grips with it. I think this is usually born out of two things: not really appreciating how different PaaSOE is in architecture, and also having got lots of experience with classic app server, making assumptions about how it works. And what this leads to is makes it hard to troubleshoot problems, and so it slows the whole project up, and not to mention is very frustrating. So we provide a range of training courses related to PaaS. We do one for developers. So I think it's important that developers understand something about the platform they're working with or developing for. And also, if you're working with Studio and you have a local PaaSOE, you need to know a basic amount to use that effectively. We also run a full 3-day administration course about creating, configuring, monitoring, securing PaaSOE. That's aimed at system administrators, but I also think it's worth having at least somebody from the development team join in to get that deeper understanding of the platform they're building applications for. It's increasingly common for people to be building REST APIs for either ABL or third-party services that will be deployed onto PaaS. And we do a 1-day course on summary of what REST is, what an HTTP request looks like, and then how you build good services to run on PaaS. This is all the interface for dealing with REST services is based on ABL objects. So if you're new to object-oriented programming with OpenEdge, then we do a 1-day introduction to it. There is also, if you fancy a bit more of a challenge, an advanced course that is also on object-oriented programming with the ABL. If you are doing this type of development, then probably the most useful tool to use is Developer Studio. And again, we do a short course on getting the most out of that, like how to use the profiler, how to use debugger, how to use the debugger with PaaSOE, and so on. As a services group, we do a whole range of services, like we've done very large projects for people, or we might do something where we just get their PaaSOE talking to Active Directory, something like that. But somewhere in the middle sits mentoring. And I think this has a couple of benefits that the customer gets from this. First of all, whatever they've got to do, they can accomplish their tasks more quickly. Don't get stuck in the weeds or go down a blind alley. But also, as we work with them, typically with them doing the hands-on work, then they're building their skills. We're not doing something and just walking away. And this actually gets people up and running much more quickly. First of all, they're starting off in the right direction. They're not going off down a blind alley. If they do get stuck and things do come up, then we can help them solve those problems quite quickly. And if there are known pitfalls, things that people commonly get stuck with, we can again help with that. Again, what we're concentrating on here is getting the customer moving and building their skills so that we drop away and leave them self-sufficient. To help with this, we have a PaaS primer engagement. This is made up of 6 3-hour sessions plus an additional 6 hours that is more focused on the customer's particular situation. As I said earlier, that a lot of people are now building REST APIs to run on PaaSOE. There are 2 transports to PaaSOE related to REST. There's one that we call the REST transport, and that is typically for backward compatibility. If you've had REST services built with previous versions of OpenEdge, they should run on there. But if you're building new ones, we'd recommend that you use the web transport and something called web handlers. This is also where you would run any web speed applications you're migrating forward onto PaaS. One of the things I said earlier is that we'd spend a lot of time now talking with customers about build and deployment automation. For many years now, people have scripted things based on Ant with the open source extension from Riverside called PCT, which have been bundled with the product since 11.7.3, I think. And they still work, and it's still there, and they're still supplied. But Ant itself started around the year 2000, something like that. So it's nearly 25 years old now. And recently we've introduced the OpenEdge DevOps framework. And this is based on Gradle, so it's no longer XML based, and it has a domain-specific language called Groovy that you can actually write code with it. And we use it for all stages of the application lifecycle. And this too is supplied with OpenEdge. It's in the bin directory of your OpenEdge install. And once you first run the command, Progress, it'll install all its dependencies. And now over to questions.
Fantastic. So back to me. Let's turn our cameras on, guys. Hi, I'm Joelle, everyone. Chris Longo, say hi.
Hi there.
Chris Skeldon, your turn.
Hi.
All right. Well, that was a fantastic presentation, and a lot of questions have come in. And I am not going to take any mercy on you all. There were actually 3 questions that are all of a similar concept. So I'm going to ask them separately, but you'll see where I'm headed with this. The first question that I wanted to get to was, when does support for Linux expire on OpenEdge 11.7?
So 11.7, all platforms retired as of April 1st. And what that means is there aren't going to be any more patches released. That doesn't mean that, if you're under support or maintenance and you call tech support, of course, they'll answer your questions, but you're not going to get any additional patching on the 11.7 platform as of April 1st, 2025.
All right. Yep, April 1st. And so you'll see where I'm going with this. The next follow-up question, will my web speed application run on paths for OpenEdge?
In all probability, well, there's the three modes of web speed programming: embedded speed script, CGI wrapping, and mapped web objects. Up until the 12.8.6, I think it is. No, 12.8. I can't remember. 12.8 something. There was only the first 2 were supported: mapped web objects and CGI wrapping, and you have a high chance of them running with minimal or no changes. Experience has been mixed, but generally they've run with very few code changes at all. Map
Okay.
web objects, there was no support for that until very recently, and there was limited support, which Chris referred to in his presentation.
12.8, right.
Okay, and another OpenEdge 12. I'm running, very specific, version 10.2b. Can I upgrade directly to version 12?
So the answer is not directly. You have to go through. You have to convert your database from 10 to 11, and then from 11 to 12. So that those conversion utilities are part of, or you'll find them in the bin directory. So you should be able to, with an OpenEdge install, convert your database from 10 to 12, but it's not a direct conversion. It has to go from a conversion of 10 to 11, then 11 to 12.
Okay,
And
so
if your database is older than 10, then you're looking at doing a dump and a load. So
okay, so I'm thinking about what Chris Skeldon was saying at the end of the webinar. If you were to run into complications with that, or just didn't feel like taking that on by yourself, is that something professional services could help with?
yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
We do it all the time.
great. Okay. Well, that's what I had related to all things 12 specifically, or upgrading and moving to 12. So let's move on to some other themes. Can you use a pro backup or pro restore to move the database?
To move the database from a major version from like a 10, 11 to 12, and
Um,
the answer
person wasn't
is
specific.
right. I mean, yes, you can move a database using Pro Backup, but it needs to be the same version. If you're trying to do Pro Backup and restore from 11 to 12, that is not a recommended path. And I would encourage you to just go onto this. If you go on the knowledge base and search for that, you'll get a whole article on it. But the recommended path to going from an 11 to a 12 is to run the conversion utility. It runs very fast. It's not a dump and a load. That's how you would facilitate that. Now,
Okay.
if you're doing a platform migration, if you're trying to move from a different flavor. If you're trying to go from, let's say, AIX to Linux or HPUX to Linux, you're looking at a dump and a load. You can't do a pro backup on AIX and then do a restore on a different platform. So.
Mhm. All right, next question. This one I think is going to be for you, Chris Skeldon. This is so fun. Two Chris's. Is the REST course, I believe that's the course you were talking about at the end of the
Yeah,
webinar. So is the REST course based on the REST resource URI editor or on the web handler?
it's on web handlers. It covers both the business entity and the what we call custom web handlers.
Okay. Next one. Maybe out of scope. Thank you, person. That was very kind of you. But how can Roundtable be used as the CI/CD tool? And can you tell us first what Roundtable is?
So
Well,
Roundtable. Oh,
go
sorry,
ahead.
go on, Chris.
Well, Roundtable is source code management, right? And release management. And can it be integrated into your CI/CD? Well, yes, definitely. Um, but it's third party software, and it requires some analysis, but it's certainly doable. Absolutely.
Okay. Any other thoughts on CI/CD since we're just talking about it?
Well, I think CI/CD, I think, is a really important topic when you start talking about modernizing your application. Um, I know this is kind of a slippery slope, but if we're you start talking about modernizing, a lot of people think of modernization in terms of the user experience, but it really is a lot more than that. And so when you when you when you get to platforms like version 12, there are additional automation tooling like the DevOps framework and Gradle, which I think Chris alluded to, that can help facilitate modernizing and automating your continuous delivery of your application. Um, and and that can really help in terms of modernizing the user experience so that you're not in the business of having to do huge major releases. You can release pieces at a time very quickly. That's the idea.
Okay. I just saw a note about how version 10 database can move. Can convert it directly to 12? Maybe we'll have to follow up on that. No big deal.
Yeah. Okay.
Unless you have something you want to say about it.
No, no, I.
Okay. Okay. Well, then I'm going to switch a little bit here again. This question. How complicated is it to migrate web speed application that uses free web framework with custom or patched web speed agent code?
Um, we've moved well, we had a framework here in the UK called eScript at one time, and we've moved a number of, and that had customized session handling in it, and we've ported a number of customers' implementation of that from WebSpeed to PASOE with minimal code changes. There are a few things to look out for, but yeah, it's generally very successful. And there's some other web frameworks people have had. Again, we've migrated them. So what the WebSpeed implementation you get with PASOE is very close to what you'd have had with Classic App Server on 11.7.
Okay, that's great. A person who is using version 11.7 with no web app usage, they want to know if they can upgrade for just supportability and what is the minimum path to do that.
So I think what you're implying is that you have no use of an application server, so you don't have to migrate from classic app server to PaaS. And if that's the case, then it's very straightforward. I mean, you would put in obviously your OpenEdge platform bits and perform a recompile, and then you've got to do a data migration of the database, whether that's a dump and load or a conversion. It's up to you. And then, of course, the other question is, are you doing a platform migration? If it's so you're staying on the same platform, then then it's more straightforward than moving to a different platform, because as we mentioned in the webinar, there can be dependencies in the application itself, in the code and in the scripts that are dependent on the underlying operating system that has to just be looked at. But yeah, I mean, it should be like any other. I guess it's more like any other OpenEdge upgrade that you're used to, like going from 8 to 9 and 9 to 10, because I guess the big thing that you have to deal with when you're going from 11 to 12 is the new app server platform. That's a completely, different animal. So
Mm,
if you don't have that, then it's more straightforward.
Okay. So I'm going to rephrase this next question a little bit since the person asking it had a very particular situation, but I want it to apply to more people. Um, are we going to provide RPM format of the Linux installations? They say we require quick installation and patching on many systems. In previous versions of OpenEdge, we were able to copy installations from a single system to multiple systems. So how are things like that going to affect them?
Well, that won't change unless you use ESAM, as Chris referred to in the presentation. And ESAM then, it's because of the way it works, you can't just copy installations from one system to another.
So if they are using eSAM, what happens then?
I'm guessing it's a reinstall, Chris.
Yeah, you just have to reinstall or make the installation of the OpenEdge platform part of your copy strategy, if you will, or your automation for deployment has to include provisioning the OpenEdge bits on the target platform. You can't just zip up an OpenEdge directory and move it around in a tar file or a zip file. Make
So
sense?
is eSAM something that is optional?
No, it is not optional, and you need to be thinking more of provisioning as opposed to just copying. And so there are tools for that nowadays for provisioning um, servers and application software
Hmm.
like Chef, Ansible. They all do that.
Okay. I hope I did that question justice to my question asker. Let's see. Next one. Is there any specific step we need to take to convert TDE enabled databases from 11.7 to 12.8?
I
I'm going to
think
say
there is a
no.
pros.
Well, go
The
ahead,
only
Chris.
reason I'm cautious, I saw a K-base going through recently about that,
Okay.
but I didn't read it.
At least you're honest.
Yeah.
Any advice on that front?
I think we'll probably have to come back to people on that.
Okay. Okay. Scrolling through the questions. All right, this is another WebSpeed question. I need to migrate a WebSpeed 10.x version front end to OpenEdge 12. What points should be kept in priority? So that sounds like a if you
So,
could only offer one piece of advice, what would it be?
test it. Um,
Yes.
That's a good one. Mhm.
if you've got if it's depends on your WebSpeed model. If it's embedded speed script or it's CGI wrapping, again you have a high chance of it working with very few code changes, but there may well be some.
Okay.
Um,
So this next question, it almost sounds like I planted it because it's the kind of thing that I would want you to answer. Rather than in-person training, are there any written resources for getting started with PaaS? What kinds of documentation's available?
well, there's a selection of the actual documentation bundles and the selections of white papers that go with them, and I think we'd provide some. We do provide online training. I'm not sure which of our courses are available online for PASOE.
Mhm. And a lot of this information is self-paced training as well,
Yeah,
not that you have to sit in a classroom.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
is
the
it
Progress Education Center has several titles, right?
and there's the list of depending which region you're in, there are courses available on the Progress website. Will give you a schedule of which courses are running or which courses are available. Self-paced training.
Perfect. All right. More recommendation for documents. Is there a recommended document to help migrate app server programs using web speed with CGI scripting to paths for OpenEdge? What are your suggestions?
There are K-bases around on this. The first thing you have to look at is whether you customize WebDisp. If you have, then you have to use something called Web Handler instead. That's under the WebSpeed directories. But after that, it's point to put it on put it on 12, recompile it, and see how it goes. If you're on still on 11.7, then especially CGI wrapping, if you could point PAS as ProPath at your web speed, your existing web speed code, run it and see what happens. Some people have got away with it running straight off the bat. Other people have had to make small code changes.
Okay. So we are getting close to the end of what people are submitting in. If you do have questions to our listeners out there right now, please keep them coming in. We do have time. But let me hit on these final ones that I'm seeing right here. Our application uses web client and was built using the ADM2 components. Are they supported for version 12.8?
And the answer to that is yes. The web client is available under version 12, 12.2, and 12.8. And if you've built an application using ADM2 components, they should run as they did in 11. The only thing that you'll have to look at is your connection strings to the app server will probably change because you won't be using the classic app server. You'll be using PAS, and you'll be using a transport called APSV, but it shouldn't require a whole lot of heavy modifications in the application other than the class or the super procedure that handles connections.
Okay. The one and only Roy Ellis, Progress employee and all-knowing MDBA person, he has just mentioned that he had some thoughts for you guys. What were you saying here, Roy? He's talking about RC4. Cipher RC4. Does that mean anything to you? If not, I'll just move on.
I would need him to articulate what the context
Okay,
of
we'll
RC4.
just move on then.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's all right. Sorry, Roy. We have scripting that manages the starting and stopping for our database and application servers as we upgrade to version 12. Will that scripting need to change? I feel like you might have touched on this one already.
Well, the short answer is yes.
Okay.
The database commands will be similar, or probably the same will still work, but it's an entirely different command, start and stop with PASOE compared to classic app server or web speed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's do another one. We are using ProxyGen to generate .NET assemblies and integrate into the OpenEdge application server. Will that continue to be functional on version 12?
And the short answer is yes. But just like with web client, the connection strings that may be embedded in those proxy DLLs, or I guess there'd be shared object libraries in Java. They would have to change to support PAS. But proxy and the proxy tool and the proxy generator are still available in 12. There are better, what we would in services, what we would talk to you about is, once you get to 12, there may be some better ways to eliminate or wash out your dependency on ProxyGen entirely, because the PaaS platform supports REST APIs very nicely. And so you will, once you get to 12, have the possibility of eliminating the need to generate proxies. And it just kind of streamlines your continuous deployment, right? You don't have, anytime you make a change, you get in 10, in 11, you have to regenerate those proxies. Well, if you embrace fully what PaaS can provide you, then you can eliminate that dependency. So, but short answer is yes, should still work.
Okay. So earlier I said that I was looking at some of the last questions. Now I'm scrolling down and there's more. You all are very, very popular today. All right. Any plans for the integration of Development Studio with Copilot or other AI?
As it stands, the 12.8 Developer Studio, I think there is there's an optional plugin. I think what do you call it? There's an extra component that you might find on the download center that you can add to it, and provides a link to ChatGPT. But I think we can probably assume this stuff's in its infancy at the moment, and we will only see greater integration going forwards.
Yep. I think that's a great answer. More to come. Now this one has a twist at the end. Do you have a written document to convert step by step a classic app server for web app using Proxix?
Proxix?
That's what it says. I'm not familiar.
Well, the answer is no. So, but it doesn't, everybody has unique use cases for how they've implemented classic app server and how they use it. And this is something that we take on every day in services. So if you want to schedule some time with us, please feel free, reach out. We'll do a discovery call and see how we can help you. So.
Yep. This is also a great shout out for our community section of our website. There's lots of information that other people put in there based on their own experiences, both Progress people and just everyday users. So you might find what you're looking for inside of there as well. Next question, are there plans to stop support for 32-bit clients in future releases? How long can we be sure that clients with 32-bit dependencies will be working?
That's a question for product management. I really can't answer that right now. But it suffices to say that 12.8 is our long-term supported release, and that goes until what, 2030, I want to say.
That sounds right.
2030. So, you could count on a GUI, the 32-bit GUI client being supported until 2030 in 12.8. Now, does that mean your 32-bit integrations are going to work till 2030? I don't know. They're third party. I don't know what Microsoft's going to plan, but yeah, generally should be okay.
Mhm. All right. I think I actually know the answer to this question. Is there a Progress 11.7 to 12.8 best practice migration guide available? Yes, this is back to the community resources. We have lots of documentation, especially in this section called Pazoe Nirvana, where you will find all kinds of information about migrating over. Do you guys want to give a better answer beyond that?
I think that's good, Joelle.
Did a great job. All right, next one. This is asking for a high-level opinion. Our current application is based on IIS, I think I'm saying that right, with no other web server installed. With the new 12.8 and Tomcat installed, would it be safe to use the same Tomcat for the application, or should it be separated out to IIS? Does that question make sense?
Okay.
So there's two things here. You need it with it's assuming this is web speed, then you needed a web server in front of it to host the messenger. the messenger plays no part with PAS-OE, neither does the name server. So IIS is not needed for that. Where you might need a separate web server or proxy of some sort, it's generally not considered a good idea to expose PAS-OE directly to the internet. So in those situations, it's quite common to put proxy, such as a web server, or something like a web server, such as IIS, that can create a reverse proxy between the outside world and PAS-OE. So Tomcat does not require IIS or another web server, but there are scenarios where you might want to keep it.
Okay. I just scrolled down a ways and I saw the question where we were stumbling over what is proxix. The person said that means proxygen. Does that change your answer at all?
Well, yeah, we talked about ProxyGen, and the answer is, I guess the question, is there documentation about it?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Uh, there probably is some a knowledge base entry. I'd have to go dig it up. Off the top of my head, I can't think of a document that deals with just ProxyGen and PAS, but it's like I said, it certainly is supported. It's certainly doable.
Okay. And this looks like it might be our last question of the bunch. Whoops, I just scrolled past it. Do you know about a TreeView OCX in 64-bit 100% compatible with 32-bit Microsoft TreeView? This is digging
No,
deep here, guys.
yeah, no.
Yeah.
Many people have looked, but I don't believe anybody's found one yet.
Okay. Well, these were fabulous questions. I felt at some points we were playing Stump the presenters, but you guys did great. Thank you for all your wonderful answers. Just to close out, is there any parting words that you would like everyone to know and remember from this presentation today? There was one thing you could pass on to the listeners.
Enjoy the ride.
Well, I think that I think modernization is on the mind of all open edgers. If it's not, it should be. Modernization is something that we all need to be cognizant of and thinking about as a kind of an ongoing journey, right? How modernizing my application, and it's more than just the user experience. And I think version 12 offers a huge advantage to you in terms of that thinking and all the different possibilities and doors that it opens when you get onto that platform for modernizing CI/CD, for modernizing user experience. There's just a lot of things you can do with the platform that you couldn't do with older releases of OpenEdge. So if you're not thinking about upgrading, you should start thinking about upgrading. Okay.
I love that. That is a great place to end. And if anybody has any questions, needs any assistance, you know where to find us. Just reach out. So thank you guys for your
Thanks, Joelle.
expertise today, and thanks for
Thank you.
everyone for
Yep.
joining.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.